All right, so I put together a little slide talk about the exhibit and about Mr. Ravnos, so you'll have some background information to share with visitors. We'll get started here. So, as Gordon said, we really like Ole Ravnos. He just has gotten some wonderful photographs. When I look at a picture like this, I mean, I know this is a great photo, but it's hard for me to put in words why it's such a good photo. So I thought, it'd be nice to have a professional photographer look at the photos and give his opinion, provide some commentary. So I invited Shmuel Thaler from the Santa Cruz Sentinel, who's also this year's Santa Cruz County Artist of the Year. And he very generously took time out of his schedule to come over to the museum a few weeks ago and look at the photos and tell us what he thought about them. And his statement is in the front of the museum. This is part of it. Ravnos shows extreme respect to the subjects in his images, whether it be a fisherman with a giant sunfish he has just caught, or a group gathered for an annual picnic. The posed photographs are designed and framed in a way that invite the viewer to want to get to know the people pictured. The photographs by Ole Ravnos are far more than a simple record or archive. Through them, we can see into the beauty and soul of a community he obviously loved. It was interesting that Gordon mentioned something about jigsaw puzzles. I've been thinking about jigsaw puzzles a lot the past couple of months. Gordon handed over to me the research files that he and several others had done. And in putting together the exhibit, I started seeing some gaps and some things where it'd be nice to know a little bit more of information, and did some more research. But there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle missing, as I'll show you in a few minutes. In doing an exhibit or a book or an article about a historic figure, of course, you want to start with the basics. When was the person born, and when did the person die? In the case of Ole Ravnos, we know that he died in March of 1945. There was an obituary in the Santa Cruz Sentinel. And it says that in 1945, when he died, he was aged 80. Well, see, I don't trust that. So I wanted to check. So I looked at the 1940 census, which is now available online, just to see if it all balances out. So here he is in the Sentinel. Now let's see, I got a little pointer here. I think I have a pointer down there. But in the Sentinel, you can see the yellow stripe. It goes right across. And you see at one point it says he's 77 years old. Well, if he was 77 in 1940, he'd be more than 80 in 1945. So we have a problem. This is not surprising. In doing historical research, you come across all kinds of inconsistencies like this. And what I do when I find something like that, I try to find as many different sources as possible for the same fact, and then look at them and see if there's a pattern or which ones you might give more weight to than others. So in this case, in the 1945 obituary, it said he was 80, which means he would have been born in either early 1865 or later 1864 and hadn't had his birthday yet, would have turned 81 later that year. Death records, also 80. 1940 census, though, would have him born in 1862 or 1863. The 1930 census, also 62 or 63. The 1920 census would have him born in 1867 or 1868. The 1910 census, 1863 or 1864. The 1908 voter registration records for Santa Cruz County, that's 1862 or 1863. And the 1900 census, 1862 or 63. So 62 or 63 is the most likely the correct time period. And a great thing about the 1900 census is that the Census Bureau also asked people not only how old they were, but the year and month of birth. And here he said he was born in October of 1862. So I'm going to go with that. And the other question is, what did he look like? As I was starting in on this project last fall, I was, kind of frustrated by the fact that we didn't have a picture of Ole Ravnos. Rather ironic, considering that he was a photographer. Was a picture of Mrs. Ravnos. This is out of a book done in 1910 on famous Swedes in California. It was written in Swedish. She was originally from Sweden. He was from Norway. And in that book, there's a story about her. Amelia Ravnos was an artist. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a moment. But we didn't have a picture of him. Well, actually, we sort of did have a picture of Ole Ravnos. Sort of a self-portrait. This is a picture taken of the Davenport cement plant. Look down at the bottom. You can see the shadow of the photographer. So in doing some research, some additional research to kind of fill in the missing parts of the puzzle, I discovered that in the 1920s, he was the member of a singing group. He sang bass for a group called the Santa Cruz Male Chorus. And when I found this article with a list of the members, I thought, well, maybe somewhere in the old newspapers there's a photograph of the chorus that identifies the members, and we'd finally get to see what he looks like. So in digging through some more papers, I found this picture. Great picture of the male chorus. Notice in the lower left, Ravnos. So he took the picture, but he could be in the picture too, right? He might have had his wife take the picture, or might have set a self-timer. So I thought, I wonder if he's in that picture somewhere. Well, the woman on the left was the pianist for the group, a woman by the name of Vera Clayton, who is a very well-known music teacher in Santa Cruz. Anybody here ever take lessons from? I remember her. But you remember her? Yeah. She taught on up into the 1960s and maybe even the early 70s. This is a picture of her. And a few years ago, I did an exhibit and book for the Museum of Art and History on the history of music in Santa Cruz County. And the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz has a whole bunch of scrapbooks, which Mrs. Clayton kept. And they go clear back into the 1920s. And I thought, maybe if I went back and looked at one of those scrapbooks, I could find some pictures of the male chorus, maybe even a picture that identifies the members. So I opened up the oldest of her scrapbooks, started about 1924, and just a few pages into it, I found this, the Santa Cruz chorus, and it identifies the members. Ole Ravnos is in the middle row, the last one on the right. This is a clipping from the Oakland Tribune. We would have never found this were it not for Mrs. Clayton keeping that scrapbook. And she also had a better copy of this picture. And with the other picture, we now know that he is in this picture. He's in the front row, the last one on the right. I think it's appropriate that he's the last one on the right, because he would have set up the camera, then he would have run around and got in the picture. And there's a close-up. So it's not a great photo, but at least we have a picture of Mr. Ravnos that is more than just a shadow. Well, Ole Ravnos was born in southern Norway. This is a map of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. made in 1866, so it's about the time he and his wife Amelia were born. If there was a poster child for Norwegian emigration to the United States, it would be Mr. Ravnos. Apparently there was a depression in Norway in the early 1880s, and from about 1880 to 1883 was the peak of Norwegian immigration to America. He came here when he was about 20 in 1883. And we know from more immigration records online that he came on board he sailed from Liverpool to Halifax, Canada, on board this ship, a ship called the Hibernian, and it took 10 days to get here. That's about all we know. We don't know a whole lot about his early life, although in the 1900 census, by then he's living in Denver, Colorado, and you can see over there on the far right, his occupation is not photographer, it's carpenter. And a lot of the people who came here from Norway, they came here to work in various crafts, various labors of different kinds. So it makes sense that he would come here to work as a carpenter rather than something like a photographer. Curiously, in the Santa Cruz directory for 1907-1908, he's also listed as a carpenter. He got married to Amelia in about 1902 in Denver, and then in about 1905, for reasons we don't know, they moved to Santa Cruz, and at least for a while he was still doing carpentry work. I kind of think that he started into the photography a little bit slowly, just started out at first and then gradually built up the business. Why he switched to photography, we don't know. There's, midlife crisis, or maybe he got tired of doing the heavy work of carpentry. Maybe he was injured and looked for a lighter work. Maybe he always loved photography and just wanted to change professions.
Picture, it says it's spelled Ravnos, R-E-V.
Right. There's at least 4 different spellings of his name. This one is Ravnos, and it's O-L-I-E, but he's at 57 Lawrence Street, which is where he is the rest of the time. So I'm sure it's him.
Yeah.
Well, not too long, actually around that time that directory came out, although it says carpenter, he was starting to get into photography. In 1907 and 1908, during the summer, he leased the photo Concession in Capitola. Now, he and his wife always lived in Santa Cruz when they were in this area, but they came to Capitola to have this business, or at least he did. This is the agreement from 1908 with the F.A. Heen Company for leasing the Capitola Photograph Gallery to use said premises only as a photograph gallery and photograph supply store, and to not sell or give away or deliver any liquors, candy, or fruit, or merchandise other than herein specified. Said premises also may be used for the sale of photographs and postal card photographs of your own make, same as handled by you in the year 1907. So we don't have a copy of the 1907 agreement, but we know from this that he was here in 1907. He leased from F.A. Heen. F.A. Heen controlled everything in great detail and clearly didn't want the different people leasing from him to compete with each other. Last year, in researching the postcard exhibit, I found this postcard image in the Deasy family collection, and Tom Deasy very generously let me make a scan of it. And as soon as I saw it, I noticed the sign in the back. It says Kodaks for rent. And I was wondering, could this be a photograph of the Ravnos picture gallery in Capitola? The message on the back and the postmark indicates that this was mailed in July of 1907, and it's basically saying, look at my new horse. Look at the new horse that we just got. If you look in the back, you can see the trestle, and you see the little building there in the center, and another building with a roof out in front there. So it is Capitola, and the timing is perfect for that to be Ravnos's gallery.
Excuse me, can you go back? Could that be deciphered by the horse's head?
Yeah, what's on the window?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we're going to spend a lot of time deciphering that. There's so little known about him. Every clue that you see, you got to pursue it. So this is a map about 1910 showing where the picture gallery, it was called then. That's San Jose Avenue coming in on the right where it says Bay. That's now called the Esplanade. It was Bayfront back then. For some reason, they called Stockton Avenue Fairview on here. I don't think that name was ever actually used.
That's about the location of the Capitola Hotel right now, right, Frank?
It'd be right next to it in that little parking lot.
Yeah.
Where the dance hall is the Mercantile.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where that's where the photographer was standing. And that's how they would have got that picture. So let's look at that sign. Yeah, look at it a little bit more closely. I spent about 2.5 weeks working on this thing. I talked to my wife who solves crossword puzzles. I put it on a Facebook post. I got some suggestions, but I'm really proud of myself. I think I figured it out. What it says is Kodaks for rent, amateur finishing and supplies, camp pictures of all kinds taken, postals, stock pictures and photos. Thank you. We know he did sell stock photos. We have some in the museum collections. Amateur finishing, this was a term that was used back then. It was something new. It was where amateurs who took photos could take their film in and get it developed and printed. There's an idea. And it says camp pictures. Now, camp pictures, I thought when I read that meant that he offered to take pictures of you with your tent and your camping stuff if you were staying in Capitola. But I don't think so. I mean, in the very early days, it was known as Camp Capitola, and I just found this postcard from 1909, and that's actually a Ravnos photo on the front of the trains. And it says, "This is a view taken of train as it passes through town, quote, or camp, as everybody here calls it." So when he says camp photos, he's basically saying Capitola photos of all kinds taken. There's something else strange about this sign. Anybody notice it? At least I think it's odd. Look at all the periods. There's periods all over the place. Kodaks period, for period, rent period, finishing period, and supplies period. A lot of periods. Now, I don't know if this is a Norwegian tradition of putting periods in everywhere, or just what the deal is, or maybe that was the style, or maybe it's an idiosyncrasy of the artist. I assume either he or his wife made that. Paul, you have a thought?
No, another thing, Kodaks. You suppose all the cameras were Kodaks?
Well, see, Kodak was, Kodak,
like Kleenex.
Eastman Kodak really wanted Kodak to be used like you use the word Xerox. I'm going to go Xerox something. And so in those days, they used the word Kodaking and Kodaks. and all those. I think they probably were Kodak cameras, actual brand, but that's a good question.
Well, it looks like some of those periods are keeping a space.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, okay, Kodak's period, 4 period, red period.
Mhm.
So it's, you know, like, because they're all crammed together, all the words are crammed, all the letters.
Well, that's one theory, although I noticed on some of the photographs where Ravnos wrote down at the bottom, notice all the periods.
Very good.
So maybe it's I think it's further evidence that that was Ravnos's gallery.
Yeah.
And here's another view, early view. This is from what's called a Sanborn fire insurance map. Here it's labeled as the photo gallery right there in the center. And down in the lower right, you can see the Six Sisters. So that's lets you know just where that was. Another, this is an actual scan that I had UCSC make. They have the original scan of one of the lease agreements. I was hoping it had a nice big bold signature down the bottom, but it's a little bit faint. This was 1913. He rented for 4 months for $75. And it was a good deal because you look right in the middle there, $25 in photographic work to be done on demand. So he paid Heen partly with photos. Well, at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Amelia Ravnos. As I said, she was an artist, and she's usually every time she was mentioned in directories or short articles, she's an artist. Except for the 1900 census in Denver, Colorado. And she's right there, she's 3 lines down under Amelia Norder, that was her maiden name. It says she was born in Sweden, June 1866. There are a lot of problems with that date too. 1866, and down the far right, photography under occupation. So this has prompted some people to say, well, how involved with the photography business here in Santa Cruz was she? Or maybe she took a lot of the pictures. It could change the whole way the exhibit is presented. So I spent a lot of time wrestling with this, trying to figure out, well, was she also a photographer? Well, this is from a little article, actually in a mining journal from 1896. It says, Miss Amelia Norder, an accomplished portrait artist at Collier's Photograph Gallery, 1643 Larimer Street, has just completed a splendid oil portrait of ex-Governor Waite to be hung in the State House. Without saying anything derogatory about the other artists whose pictures are hung there, it can be truthfully said that her picture of the ex-governor is by far the best of any of the governors yet painted. Well, notice what it says. She is a portrait artist at Collier's Photograph Gallery. So I can just see the census taker coming and saying, so what sort of work do you do? Well, I work at a photography gallery. Okay, occupation, photography. Didn't say photographer, said photography. So I'm not sure that she was really a photographer. I have really found no actual mention of her anywhere as a photographer. I think she certainly was involved with the business and helped her husband in different ways. But she had her own line of work as an artist, even here in Santa Cruz. Yes?
At that time, they didn't have color photos, so could she possibly have enhanced with oil
That's
paint?
another possibility, that she was tinting photos, or that she was touching up negatives, or airbrushing photos. There are a lot of ways that photographers can have artists working for them.
Where was she living then?
This is in Denver. Yes?
Her picture has a guitar. Is there any print or information about her being a musician?
as well as an artist?
It didn't mention, I don't think, you ever come across anything?
So, it's a good question. So that picture comes from, as you mentioned, a Swedish book. And there's a paragraph about her all in Swedish. So I don't know if you've done any Swedish translation work. But
Well, you have a
I
translation.
did? Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Did I do that? I didn't
Yeah,
remember
okay.
that. Maybe, does that say anything about it?
I don't remember saying anything
okay.
about the
Okay.
the
Maybe
guitar.
just a prop that they
Yeah. So I think I just haven't found any evidence that she's always mentioned as an artist. Turns out I checked on this name Collier. Okay, she worked for somebody in Collier named in Colorado. Well, it turns out Joseph Collier was the premier photographer in Colorado in the late 19th century. 2 books have been written about him. Have you got a copy of one of his books yet?
No.
Oh, well, I found one used. It's winging its way from Oregon as we speak. I don't have too high a hope that it's going to have something about Amelia Norder in it, but it's worth looking at anyway. It's a very important Colorado photographer. So she didn't do photography, right? Then you come across something like this, 1912, opens gallery in Capitola, A. Ravnos. The Laurent Street photographer has opened a photograph gallery in Capitola and is now prepared to do work of all kinds in his line. That's real clear, isn't it? Mr. Ravnos is open. So I think it's a mistake. I think it was supposed to say, oh, Ravnos.
Well, you know what's interesting is that at this period of time, the Impressionist movement was flourishing. And if you read about the wives of these Impressionists were great photographers.
Oh, well, there was a woman in Santa Cruz in about 1912 who had her own photography business. I don't know anything about her. Here is an ad that was in the newspaper, Ravnos Photo and Art Studio. A little bit later on, about 1915 and 1920, they had a studio on Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz. And it sounds like he was not only selling photos, but she was apparently selling her artwork as well. One of the earliest pictures, Ravnos pictures of Capitola, is this one of Lover's Lane. Apparently taken in that first summer, 1907, because it shows up on a postcard, postmarked 1907.
Frank, it's super interesting where that is. Not everybody may not.
Yeah,
may
this
not know
is
it.
where Grand Avenue is now. This is all fallen off from cliff erosion
The top of Depot Hill on the
into
ocean.
the,
one grand for that building?
Yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So that's all gone now, but this was very famous in the early 1900s, known as Lover's Lane.
Frank, there's a couple comments. So you talked about maybe her influence in the colorized. So this was one of several images that he took that became colorized and became a very popular postcard. If you go on eBay, you'll see these every couple of weeks. You'll see this card. So, so that's just another connection.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
You and I think alike.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
You would have put together the same talk. Yeah, this is the colorized version. I hope he got paid well for this. This was printed by the Edward Mitchell Company, the Postcard in San Francisco. And there's another version. It's hard to read down at the bottom. It says Lover's Lane at Capitola, California. But I've also found one where the at Capitola, California was removed. And this becomes a generic Lover's Lane postcard that was probably sold all over the western United States. Like I say, I hope Mr. Ravnos got paid for that. Ole and Amelia Ravnos left the area for a couple of years. In 1909 and 1910, they lived in Turlock. There's a big Swedish colony in the Turlock area at that time. Don't know why they went there or why they came back. But when they came back during 1911, they had a studio in Brookdale.
Can I tell you just a quick little funny story
Yeah.
about that? So,
Sure.
So part of the research that I was doing along this Turlock phase was I found out that the curator for the Turlock Museum collection was also kind of his full-time profession was to be the head mortician at the Turlock mortuary. So, poor Michelle, I said to her, we're going to Turlock. And I said, we're going on a field trip, and we're going to the Turlock mortuary. So here we are at the Turlock mortuary, and I'm going in, this is like the Ritz of mortuaries. I mean, this is no shabby place. If you're gonna get buried in Turlock, that's the place to go. Anyway, so he went with it, and he showed me these wonderful photos of what Ravnos took back in that time. And I can run that to Michelle, who's just sitting in the car reading her book. You gotta come in, you gotta come in. Anyway, so you just never know where research leads you sometimes.
So Michelle wasn't dying to see that.
No.
There's people that have just gone through a, horrific experience.
Yeah.
Not even words like all excited.
Anyway, that's the Turlock story.
Early on, they lived at 57 Lawrence Street. That house is still there. Cute little house. This is where they lived. Nothing in history is straightforward. In order to find out that house was a little bit tricky because in the 1940s, Santa Cruz changed all the street numbers. This is their house on Baldwin Street. This was 40 Baldwin Street. You see now it's 142 Baldwin Street. So I had to find a fire insurance map that showed the outline of all the houses, and I had to find, it would show 40 Baldwin Street. Then you have to go to the Google satellite image and superimpose the two and see if the house is still in that location. And this house, according to the real estate website, was built in 1900. This one has been extensively remodeled, so it's not as interesting as the other one. Well, living way over there, they were actually quite convenient to get to Capitola. It could very well be that they took the electric streetcar line to get here, because those two houses are only about a block from Mission Street, where the streetcar line was. The streetcar went down Mission into Santa Cruz, down the Pacific, then out Soquel, down Cayuga Street, and then Pine Street, and then Seabright, through Twin Lakes, and then out Portola to Capitola. I know that I read from Santa Cruz to Capitola, you had to pay the fee twice. It was 6 cents to get to Twin Lakes, and another 6 cents if you wanted to go all the way to Capitola. So he could have taken the streetcar, which appears in one of his photos, or maybe he drove. This is from the Santa Cruz Sentinel, or actually the Evening News, 1912, buys a Ford. Ole Ravnos, the photographer living on Lawrence Street, has purchased a new Ford 5-passenger touring car from W.W. Cruikshank, the local agent. In those days, if you bought a new car, they put it in the newspaper. I thought he must have been doing pretty well to afford a car in 1912. I mentioned this to a friend of mine who collects old cars, and he said, well, the touring car was the cheapest model.
He was thrifty too.
One of the things that Ravnos did to make money is he would photograph events with lots of people, like this camp of the League of the Cross Cadets in Capitola in 1915, print up the pictures on postcards, and then sell the postcards to the campers. And Gordon found not only this postcard, but look at the wonderful message on the back. It's July 1915, Dear Ma, Pa, and Ruth. Here is a picture of camp, which was taken before we arrived, and sending a fish, which you no doubt have already received. This was caught in Monterey Bay today. We know postcards didn't take long to get to San Francisco in those days, and I hope the fish didn't take very long. He would number the pictures in sequence. And look at this one. This is number 58 of the League. This is a close-up of one corner. This is the one where the members of the League are getting on the train to go back to San Francisco. So I'm not sure why he took this picture, because he couldn't sell it to them. They were leaving. But I think that's kind of the way Ravnos was. He liked to get the whole complete story, right to the very end. As Gordon said, Ravnos was a very early photojournalist. This was an era when newspapers were starting to use more photographs in the newspaper. They had what's called the photo engraving process. This picture that he took in the 1920s of the wreck of the La Feliz over at Natural Bridges appeared in the local newspaper, but it said on it NEA, or Newspaper Enterprise Association. So Ravnos had plugged into that service that provided images to a lot of different newspapers.
Ravnos, #1.
Yeah.
Now we know from that shadow picture that he did have one of the big view cameras, probably one that made 8x10 negatives. But I think he probably used several different cameras, including a smaller cameras that he could have handy to catch something quick when it happens, like this shark that came in on the beach in Capitola. That's a blue shark, by the way. I had to research that. Get out my shark book. An ad around Christmas time, I think this was 1919. Yeah, we take them night or day. Well, see, he was trying to say that he can take pictures that you might not be able to take as an amateur, say. Ole Ravnos got made the news, as Gordon pointed out to me a while back. He really got his name in the news only twice. Once when he died, I'll talk about that in a moment, but also in 1926 he was involved in this big scandal. There was a whole bunch of newspaper articles about it. Santa Cruz County at that time in the 20s had this huge egg industry. Santa Cruz and Petaluma were the two big egg-producing areas in California, maybe even in the West. And there was an annual poultry fair in Santa Cruz. Mr. Ravnos went to the fair to take some pictures. The Sentinel wanted him to take pictures of their booth at the poultry fair. And the fellow who had organized the fair said, "Oh no, you can't take pictures. I've given exclusive rights to a photographer in San Francisco to come down and take the pictures of the poultry fair." Well, Ravnos didn't like that, and there was a big outcry. All the other photographers were protesting. There are very few quotes from him, but here's one. "My specialty is commercial work. Any person can see the difficulties of making an adequate living in this line, in this city, and when I am barred from probably the principal event in my line of work in the entire year, what chance have I to get by?" Well, in 1945, Mr. Ravnos passed away, as I said earlier, and he did something very significant. He willed his entire estate to the Santa Cruz County Hospital. It was to ease some of the suffering of those who have to go there. His estate was worth about $22,000. Not only was there the house, but he also owned a lot of stock. And on the timeline in the museum, you can read all the stocks that he had. Interesting. Well, we think Ravnos was a pretty neat guy. He took some really amazing pictures. And I hope that you will enjoy the exhibit and that visitors this year will enjoy the exhibit. Before I close, I wanted to just, since we got everybody together in the room here, I wanted to just give you talk about a couple of the other displays that you'll see. One, we have this table. This is a table that actually belonged to F.A. Heen. We have it on loan for this exhibit. And the reason why we know it belonged to F.A. Heen, because it says so right on the top. This was presented to him on his birthday, August 16th, 1895. We have it on loan from his great-great-grandson. So it's a real treasure, and we're fortunate to have that on display for the year. Also, right in the middle of the room, it's primarily a photographic exhibit, but people like stuff, and the museum has lots of stuff. So I've tried to bring out as much of the stuff as possible, and as well some things on loan. In the middle of the room, I create a little display of equipment that would have been used when the Ravnoses were alive, an old radio, movie projector, some cylinder records, a 1912 typewriter, and an adding machine. And all of these have something in common. You can do all those functions on a little handheld iPhone. So I think that'll make for a good conversation when people come into the museum. I especially like the adding machine. The adding machine is actually one that I loaned for the exhibit. It's something my parents bought in the 1960s. It's a 1926 or thereabouts adding machine. All it does is add. It cannot subtract, multiply, or divide. And it weighs 32 pounds. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much.
Before you get up and start moving around, I need your attention. Kathleen and Stephanie and Pam put together all this